Hello everyone, Mason here. How are you doing? Today it's time for a book review. A missing child, a family torn apart. It's every parent's worst nightmare. Ellie Mack has a life full of potential. She's preparing to sit her GCSEs and put high school behind her. But when she leaves for the library just a short walk away, promising to be back by tea time, she never arrives, and she never returns home. 10 years later, Ellie's mother Laurel finally receives some closure, and she's ready to start the healing process. But life isn't done with Laurel. The awful truth is about to come out, and she may not be ready for the revelations that it brings with it. Today's book review is And Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. To celebrate reaching 200 subscribers, I said I'd let the Wheel of Names choose what I would read next. You guys sent in your suggestions, and of course the winner was Anne with a book. I have to admit, coming into this one I was nervous, because I knew if I hated it I'd have to come and give it a negative review, and that might put people off ever suggesting something again. Luckily, although I had mixed feelings on this book, I didn't hate it, so I don't have to be negative, which is a relief. I do want to thank Anne, because this was a pretty decent recommendation to give me, if I'm honest. So why did I have mixed feelings? Well, to be blunt, I think it's mostly my own fault. Now, as you know, I read a lot of thrillers and mysteries. I think the problem with that is that I've come to expect certain things. My main problem with this book is that nothing was surprising. There was no twist that caught me off guard. I hate having to say this because I usually roll my eyes when other people do it, but I saw pretty much everything coming. Pretty early on in the narrative, it becomes almost blatantly obvious what's gonna happen, and as the story progressed, I was getting annoyed at Lisa Jewell. Does she think she's clever? She's not going to catch me out. I know what's going on. I was just waiting and waiting for my expectations to be played with, to be proven wrong, for the twist to come. But that can't always be the case. Eventually, the twist becomes a gimmick. It becomes the only thing that we remember. Look at something like Fight Club. You don't hear about any of the other elements in the story, you just hear about the twist. The problem with thrillers almost always having a twist is the audience comes to expect them. They start looking out for them and they're disappointed when they don't come, so the author is almost required to write one. It becomes the crutch that the story is propped up on. Everything else that came before it doesn't really matter because the problems that he had are rendered irrelevant. Sure, the rest of the story was boring, but that twist was amazing. But here's the thing, Lisa Jewell wasn't trying to be clever. She wasn't trying to hide anything or catch me out, so the fact that I was annoyed by her not doing so isn't her fault, it's mine. When you walk towards a roller coaster, for the most part you can see the track, but that doesn't mean that you don't enjoy it, because it's about the ride. Here in the UK, we have a theme park called Alton Towers that opened a ride called 13. Now, 13 had a gimmick. It had a part of the track that you couldn't see, and this is a good example of what I'm talking about. 13 was entirely dependent on that gimmick. The rest of the roller coaster wasn't even that exciting, it was just all about the shock factor. The fact of the matter is, whether you're talking about a novel or a roller coaster, sometimes an enjoyable ride is more important than one that shocks you, because yeah, the shock may be exciting, but sometimes it's a cheap gimmick designed to make you forget that everything around it was boring. And Then She Was Gone is not supposed to shock you because it has a gimmick. It's supposed to shock you because what happens to Ellie is awful. What happens to Ellie can and does happen in real life. It's not about the twists and turns, it's an exploration. of how and why a child goes missing, the motivations behind it, and what it does to a mother, what it does to a family. Reviewing a book like this is genuinely hard. I never know what to say. The reason that I always come up with my own description at the beginning of a video is because a lot of the time a book's actual description gives away far too much. I've said it before, but when I first started this channel, I didn't understand how people could go into a book without reading the description, without knowing what it was about, but the more I read, the more I understand why they do it. What I will say is, the story itself is enjoyable, for want of a better word, because I don't know if you can truly enjoy reading a story as dark as this, but I definitely don't regret reading it. Unfortunately, and I feel bad saying this, the main character, Ellie's mother Laurel, is not a very nice woman. She says some pretty awful things and she's quite judgmental. I wish that she'd been more likeable because I would have found it easier to empathise with her. As it stands, I actually felt more sorry for the rest of the family, but we don't see anything from their point of view and I really wish that we had. There are multiple points of view in this story, but none of them are particularly likeable characters. As is the case with a lot of these types of stories, the narrative is split between then and now, and we get more information as the story progresses. There's a lot of dramatic irony because most of the time we are at least 1 or 2 steps ahead of Laurel. For the most part, the writing was fine, but I do have to admit that there were a few things that took me out of the moment because they made me laugh when they weren't supposed to, like, and there it went, slipping away like a slippery thing. There's even a moment where Laurel is looking at a character and thinking about how similar they look to Ellie, and one of the similarities she points out is the way that their ears attach to their head. I can't say I've ever heard that one before. Oh, you have your father's eyes, and your ears attached to your head the way your mothers do. In the end, I quite liked And Then She Was Gone. It was a good story told well, with fleshed out characters that are vivid and seem real, even if they're not likeable. The exploration of the family dynamics and the fallout of a child going missing were interesting, and there were definitely some emotional moments. I think it's impossible not to read a story like this and not feel at least a little bit of heartbreak for a character like Ellie. It's not flawless, but I'd still definitely recommend it, even if it's not an urgent must-read that I feel you need to pick up right now. My question for today is this: what is the worst twisty trope? For example, if everything turns out to just be a dream or taking place inside the character's mind, does that make the story worthless? If you've enjoyed this review, the like and subscribe buttons are just sitting there waiting to be pressed. Now press them, or else I'll throw a balloon filled with custard right at your face. If you want to get in touch, say hi and have a chat, you know where the comments section is, or you can connect with me via Twitter. The link is in the description. Thanks ever so much for spending time with me today, guys. Until next time, take care. For now, I'm off, and you should have a good one.